Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Professor Anupama Kundoo. Professor Kundoo graduated from the University of Mumbai in 1989 and received her PhD degree from the TU Berlin in 2008. Her research-oriented practice started in 1990 in Orville and has generated people-centric architecture based on spatial and material research for lower environmental impact while being socioeconomically beneficial. Her body of works has recently been exhibited as a solo show, Taking Time, at Louisiana Museum of Modern Art, Denmark in May 2021. She is currently a professor at Potsdam School of Architecture, Germany, and the head of urban design, Orville. She is the recipient of the 2021 RIBA Charles Jencks Award for her contribution to architectural theory, the 2021 Auguste Perret Prize for Architectural Technology, and the 2021 Building Sense Now Global Award of the German Sustainable Building Council. Her studios are based in Berlin, Germany, and Pune and Pondicherry in India. Warm welcome to you, Professor Kundoo.
Hi, I'm just going to try sharing my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Should I do it this way?
Perfect. Perfect.
Because then I don't see the rest, but I'll just try to save a few minutes here. That's all right. First of all, thank you, everyone. And thank you, David, for bringing me here. And thank all of you for having me here. It's a pity I'm not on the spot, but I'm so happy that it's happening. I'm going to talk about matters of scale as related to the production of architecture, particularly the post-industrial shift in the manufacture of buildings, from handmade interactions with natural building materials to hand tools and hand scale manufactured bricks, to a contemporary building culture where large-scale machines source and assemble building materials and ready building elements through global supply chains. The production of buildings has seen major changes. Architecture, the backdrop for human life to be lived out, has accordingly seen a significant shift from buildings that carried the fingerprints of the makers and spoke to us about their lives, as well as the lives of the inhabitants. There is a growing landscape of buildings that tell stories instead of the technological advances in the large-scale building industry and economy, where standardization and uniformity replaces the custom-made and uniqueness of individual lives. The result is also the loss of texture in the new materiality and the tendency to gloss over the role of texture and porosity in human encounters with the materiality of architecture and its perception as habitat. So the references are going to mostly be from my own work, where I have, over the last 3 decades of my practice, been questioning some of the basic assumptions and construction habits that humanity has adopted during the long process of industrialization. And rather than focusing on shortage, I have sought abundance through investing in human resources and human resourcefulness, such as ingenuity, time, skills, care, and sense of community. So I would like to talk about the human scale versus the machine scale. But when I'm talking about the human scale, I'm also wanting to reveal the potential that certain human scale environments allow human resources to be more engaged and at our service. And this is what is going to unfold, I think, through this talk. So I want to just mention three aspects of this discussion. One is that, we've all agreed that the materiality of architecture is very problematic in our times, because it leads to large-scale social, environmental, and economic imbalances through the way we are producing architecture. So we've been talking a lot about materiality and limited natural resources, but I would like to talk about these resources from the perspective not of building materials for their own sake or getting out of the rhetoric of whether mud is good and cement is bad, but looking at the problem not as external materials, but how human resources have throughout engaged with natural resources. Human resources being infinite, the time, the intelligence, and our engagement, our interaction with the materials led to a certain kind of architecture, whether it was modest or exquisite. It was not the material, it was the way the human engaged with the material. That's one aspect of the discussion. The second is that having standardized building technologies today, I think we have shifted the discussion from abundance to one of scarcity. So earlier, we used to build with whatever we had in abundance. If there was clay, we used clay. If there was wood, we used wood. If it's in a desert, there's no wood, we did domes, and we found ways to use whatever it is we had in abundance. Not only in terms of material, but in terms of human knowledge and skills and everything. So because we've standardized everything now, suddenly the discussion, like we even built with ice, if that's all that we had. But today the discussion is about a standard global technology. And because those materials come from far away, suddenly everybody feels they are poorer. And now we have to feel like we have not enough steel, we don't have enough energy to produce this and cement. And so the whole discussion is about shortage, about, not having materials, but actually everywhere you go, everything is material in the earth. So this is one aspect I would like to bring in. Thirdly, that architecture was always a custom-made product. It was not mass-produced. Even if there were modules that were made, they were always adapted to specific spots. And now we are increasingly the standardization is the new vernacular. And that leads to an object that, first of all, doesn't work for everyone, but on the other hand, it also comes at an exorbitant price. It's the cost of Starbucks versus a local small cafe, which gives you coffee in the morning, where there is a kind of, I mean to talk about the custom-made aspect of it, not just the economic, and what it does to the city and to the loss of, to the scale discussion. So these are the three aspects I want to, put up there as in the background. And then I want to just say that my own experience, a little bit, so that you know where I'm coming from, because I'm going to refer to mostly my own projects and my own inquiries. I had started my practice 32 years ago in Auroville, a city that is designed by chief architect Roger Angers from Paris. And it was a visionary city, not utopia as it's known today, but it's a laboratory city where all of these questions we talk about today that are problematic were addressed in a holistic and radically rethought manner. And I had the good fortune of starting my office in such a place. And, I've continued to work on those lines. I have also been involved in urban design. I've recently been appointed the head of urban design for Auroville. And so that is the background. And what I learned from Roger Angers about scale is that the human scale is not about what size you occupy, because visually you can see much further. Tactile, the tactile world is more close to you. And whatever we experience as architecture is from the product, from the chair to the building and the city. So there are various scales within the scale, and all of it, the human scale is disappearing from all those scales of architectural production. So This is just to give you a couple of images of the context of Auroville, where actually land, there are two unique aspects of this future city. Land cannot be owned, it belongs to the commons, and motorized transportation was questioned already 50 something years ago, and many other aspects. Actually, this model is right now in MoMA. It's being shown there. And on the ground, a barren land was reforested, and this is one of my projects there. But just to explain that it's not like a fictional place, it's an actual city in the making. And right now I'm working on a long urban project here, an alternative to the tower typology for high density, but a project where the clusters of 50 to 60 residents forming, there are different clusters of co-housing and shared facilities in a horizontal circulation. All of this is just to give you an idea of the background, but and to explain that here is Jan Gehl, and we are here exploring some of it in the University of Stuttgart, where with our students we are exploring those new urban fabrics that in future pedestrian cities we will be able to make possible. So in that kind of a context of architectural laboratory, my practice has been based, and I want to show a couple of smaller scale material engagements that I research and experiments that I undertook, just to let you know how I've been working from city scale to designing building technologies and material sourcing and all that. So this was my own first hut where, I was looking at the possibility of round wood construction as opposed to timber. When you use the irregular building component, I mean, what is the cost of cutting a round thing into a square to produce it if you produce things industrially? What do you lose? What do you gain in terms of standardization, and what you have to do less, but what do you also lose? One thing is that you can, in this case, use possibly a 3-year-old tree instead of a 25-year-old one to be able to extract the same amount. So I've been exploring those scale questions which have to do with manufacture by actually testing different materials and looking at the aspect of time as a resource. So there were other experiments where when radically rethinking the production and material sourcing, we have investigated baked in situ earth construction, where mud houses were built with the intention of baking it in situ to avoid cement, the use of cement. And this is based on the pioneering work of Ray Meeker, and before that Nader Khalili. And so these are the kind of, when you enter the scale of making, we were looking at, through human engagement, what is the kind of texture and, what does that scale of human engagement leave behind as architecture. But basically the idea in this kind of construction is that normally regular kilns, when you make bricks, about 40% of the heat is lost into the kiln walls. And in this case, we are able to tap that heat and fire the walls, and we make cement redundant. So we use fire as the cement, actually. And if we do not go into the human scale of production, then what are the type of experiments and discoveries that we cannot allow, if they have to be in through large supply chains, etc. So while we were questioning in this case that if architecture, rather than being a consumer of building materials, what if it becomes a producer of local building materials? So that was the inquiry. and all the other products, ceramic products that one could co-produce, from bricks to tiles to wash basins, toilet pans, and all kinds of things, and look at a holistic approach. And again, this kind of production is about the handmade scale. Broken tiles, used to finish it. This is for, the project is Homes for Homeless Children in Pondicherry. So it's also a social project. Okay, so some of the things that I realized in the course of all these years, and I'll mention some of the human resources that could be unleashed into the new landscape if we were able to shift from the machine made to allowing the human scale, not only in the use of the building, but in the production of architecture, so that the decentralized knowledge and wisdom and skills can again become part of the society, and that could lead to more abundance rather than shortage. So for example, if we begin architecture from material sourcing, not just with buying materials that are offered by catalogs, but if you can actually again unleash the human engagement towards territory, towards materials and their sourcing, how the landscape could benefit through that. You see very well in the pre-industrial making of materials in the old brick kilns. You notice that the way the fuel that goes into producing that hand scale the material, it's not how many kilojoules were consumed only, but in a typical brick kilns, it's the scale of production which makes the brick problematic. It's not just that in today's green rating systems, they just tell you brick equals to so and so much kilojoules. But in my opinion, it's the scale at which you produce that a thing is damaging or not, and how much its impact can be absorbed. But also the human settlement, they are not only brick producers, they do that in a certain season. There is a territorial interdependency of all these various things that go into producing the brick. It's not just coal brought in from somewhere, huge quarries made somewhere, and so on. So I have been actually exploring all these, the materiality of architectures from the very beginning, where the human actually intervenes with the territory, from the territory to source a material, be it wood or lime, and how a society is affected by what it is they make, and how what we make in fact makes us. And you see very well compared to those industrial stone quarries, what the tool or the machine actually does, and what's the impact even of the sound of chipping and extracting through clever means, to lift slabs through human ingenuity, as opposed to bringing in large machinery and only producing huge negative impact. So I wanted to enter those subtle areas rather than just judging a material as good or bad. I think it's a scale of what is extracted that has to be seen, and how in contemporary architecture, all of those skills can be used to flatter the material and to reveal their yet undetected, undiscovered potential of the same age-old, timeless, time-tested materials, and to be able to produce architecture through those methods. The other thing that if we go into this direction, the intelligence and human ingenuity is another thing that would flourish. Instead of the environment and natural resources being depleted, if we were to more rely on our cleverness, then human beings would evolve like we have done up to now. And there would be a widespread intelligence and ingenuity in the way things are made. I have myself produced buildings with much less resources, many more square meters with, for example, with terracotta. These are age-old materials, but by using engineering, I've been able to produce, use what there is abundance of, whether it is material or whether it is people or skills, whatever there's a lot of, use it and, make the whole place, make the architecture be produced collectively with all this kind of information and fingerprints left on the architecture, and that is also a kind of texture that the architecture is left with. So these are some of the images of that kind of architecture. And these are actually engineered ceilings that allow me to save about 60% of steel by having terracotta as lost shuttering, filler slabs. So there's a lot of engineering experimentation. And I think when you have less materials, or if you resist the temptation to just allow mass production to solve your way, out of the problem, then you land up putting all that energy into developing human resources, and you land up enriched and cleverer. That's what I noticed. And what I already mentioned, if we invest more in natural resources, human resources, we would land up with knowledge using much less resources, natural resources, and less embodied energy. And I have been managing to build, looking at alternatives also with reinforced cement, concrete, for example, being replaced with ferrocement, and using thin mesh, and looking at alternatives to chicken mesh. We are also looking at natural fibers and so on. So there's a lot of, if we enter the handmade, it doesn't have to be vernacular. There's a whole lot of things we could start making, such as this modular housing that can be put up in a week. I think that this is the kind of discussion I want to bring to the table, to not leave the human hand out of the equation as yet. And if you start exploring through those empirical studies, you'll in the age of climate change, we will need to find lighter materials that will deal with those seismic loads. That light doesn't mean it's weaker, it's cleverer almost. So there's a whole lot of things that we have not even begun to explore, I feel. And so I think the future would be somehow one where the shift in the post-industrial age will move out of pure manufacturing, and there will be more value through design. I hope so. We custom-made architecture may hopefully come back when we post-COVID times are going to produce our buildings locally, at least the humble buildings. In this case, I'm building ferrocement roofs by using paper, recycled cartons to use as formwork, and this type of investigations to build with very little. But all of these solutions bring in a very different kind of scale and texture of the handmade, as opposed to the flat curtain wall building skins that are machine made. And finally, one area of research that is part of all of this investigation is urban waste. And we have also noticed that I think architecture has a great potential to permanently capture building these molecules that from the waste, can actually be permanently captured in architecture if we really think a little bit more, if we take a little more time to think before we act. So there's a whole lot of experimentation that I've been undertaking also with that. But again, all of these have got that hand scale. I'm also looking at reusing urban waste in the production processes, in the production of forms, and all the areas where we don't, only those who work on the building site know where the potential is to ease things, and to be able to use what we have from the garbage piles. Actually whatever we throw away has still so much resource in it, which if we allow the decentralized kind of human ingenuity and allow students, allow young people, and not just give it out to specialized large companies, so much of our problems could be solved while contributing to a much more personal architecture. And then the other aspect of that type of texture and scale is that when you do remain in the human scale, we might go back to co-creation rather than, competitions. We probably go into more collaborations because the human being can only do that much. So of course, purely using machines to build bigger and bigger with less and less human engagement is one scenario. And the other is to have many more people working in sync. And probably for that, we have to come up with technologies that are not alienating, and to design so that anyone can build, or at least a few experts are required, but that the people, and to build in such a way that the local economy can also grow, and that the housing can be brought back to the common man, yeah. So these are some co-housing projects. I think I'm just going to show some images to get a sense of the kind of things I've built. And hopefully that if some of these questions enter the new landscape, we will be creating an environment of much more collaboration within architecture offices, but also interdisciplinary and with other offices. I'm just ending with this one project of Auroville that I began with. It's that urban design I showed in the beginning, that I mean, there is a collaboration that is possible also intergenerationally. I'm continuing Roger Angers' work because I think when the visions are big, the lifetime is not sufficient. And so we can extend the lives of those whose ideas are still relevant. And I have involved my students from, at that time I was teaching at Yale, and I have students from Copenhagen and Potsdam working on some of the actual projects so that they get a head start. And by the time they are older, they'll be able to already benefit from the architects. I see myself as a bridge between the past generation and the future generation. So in all of these high rises, we are still attempting to retain the human scale in that kind of housing. And some of the material researches, what the facades of the future, urban farming, and all of those things, I don't have time to explain it, but I just want to mention that we don't have to have this landscape where, architects, the young people get to practice only when they are much, much older. I think they can already begin, and if we can unblock the whole collective and co-think the new scenario. And I think there's a lot of potential for personal engagement throughout. And through that kind of approach, I think we can have high quality buildings that automatically become humane, because the processes are within the human scale. So I'll end with this, that finally, I think we don't have to get rid of work as if it were a bad thing and wait till we retire. I think if we allow people to participate and build and not have such a, have the good kind of work-life balance, I think since work is not a means just to earn a living, it's a way to develop ourselves. And I think I would like to end with recognizing that our time is the most underutilized resource. And I hope some of that can be discussed later, that I think it's through replacing the notion that time is money with the one that time is the resource. I think if the way we handle time changes, then the way we handle space will change. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kundoo, for the fascinating lecture and inspiring notions and impressive body of work.